everyone. On behalf of Engineers Australia, I'm delighted to welcome you all to our Thought Leaders series, Why Digitalisation of Industry is the Net Zero Hero. My name is Jan Irvine, General Manager of Northern Division and South Australia Division for Engineers Australia. Firstly, in keeping with our custom, Engineers Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to them and their cultures and to elders past and present. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that today's webinar is being hosted with Engineers Australia's industry partner, Siemens. Siemens is a global technology powerhouse that started its Australian operations in 1872, celebrating their 150th anniversary this year and their 175th anniversary globally. Today, Siemens brings together the digital and physical worlds to benefit customers and society. Active around the world, the company focuses on industry, infrastructure, mobility and healthcare. This includes intelligent infrastructure for buildings, distributed energy systems and automation and digitalisation in the process and manufacturing industries. Creating technologies for more resource-efficient factories and resilient supply chains, smarter buildings and grids, cleaner, comfortable transportation and advanced healthcare, the company empowers customers to modernise the industries that form the backbone of economies, transforming the everyday for billions of people around the world. Today, we're going to hear from our expert speakers in an insightful discussion. I'd now like to welcome our moderator for today's session, Keith Ritchie. Keith is the Head Communications and Government Affairs for Siemens in Australia and the Pacific. He's been instrumental in driving technology thought leadership in the country in areas such as the energy transition, including green hydrogen, smart infrastructure, digitalisation and Industry 4.0, including his role in establishing the Prime Minister's Industry 4.0 Task Force. Please welcome Keith Ritchie.
Thanks, Jan, and thanks very much to Engineers Australia for hosting such an important Thought Leaders event. The topic of why digitalisation of industry is so critical to net zero is something that hasn't been talked about a lot, and I think this is a fantastic opportunity to really make sure that we understand those implications between digitalisation of industry and our ability to achieve our net zero targets. We have a stellar lineup today with us, and I'll introduce you all shortly. Before I do that, I also want to do a big welcome to all of those viewers online. We have a lot of people signed up to this event, which is fantastic, across Australia. And one of the things with engineers is that often they don't understand the importance of the role that they play in solving the biggest challenges that we have in the world today. We tend to rely on politicians and people like that, but engineers are really at the core of advising us on what we should do and then working with people to make that happen. So before I introduce each speaker, I want to talk a little bit about the topic, a bit of context around what we're talking about here. So the World Bank has said that over the last 5 years, energy prices globally have gone up by 75%. At the same time, countries, companies, societies have committed to net zero targets. And we have around 76% of the world covered when it comes to emissions and net zero targets. Now, Australia's commitments around that, we have a 2050 commitment to net zero, and in between we have a greenhouse gas reduction target of 43% by 2030, according to 2005 levels. So we have to look at how we're going to achieve that. Now, in that race to net zero, there's a few things that are going to be really important. Of course, rapidly deploying renewable energy, and that's the main topic that people have talked about so far. But really what we want to talk about is the other side of the equation. How does industry support this as well? It's not just about renewables, and in fact, we're not sure if we're going to be able to deliver enough renewables in time to meet those targets. There's a lot of challenges around that globally, but the other side of the equation is what role can industry play in reducing emissions? So industry represents about 38% of the world's energy consumption. And there's a lot of opportunities through digitalization to actually reduce the consumption of energy. And when you're talking about those costs involved in energy prices going up around the world and in Australia, it's kind of like a perfect storm. So there's an opportunity to really focus on that technology and digitalizing industry and getting a faster return on investment, at the same, making our businesses more competitive, making Australia more prosperous, and also helping achieve the net zero targets and the greenhouse gas emission targets more quickly. With me today, I'll start with Bettina, actually. Bettina, thank you for being a guest today. Bettina is the Acting Director of Manufacturing and Supply Chain for the South Australian Department of Industry, Innovation and Science. She also has another hat where she's the National Chair of the Industry Capability Network, and we'll find out a bit more about that soon. David Schutter. David is one of Australia's preeminent experts on advanced manufacturing. He has established and run the Innovative Manufacturing CRC for the country with some significant results since 2016, and we'll talk a bit about that during this session as well. Catherine is the CEO, Managing Director of Food SA, and Food SA is the peak body for the food and beverage industry in South Australia. Milan Bauer is Siemens' local regional expert on factory automation, so he leads the factory automation business. He also leads our food and beverage vertical. So thank you and welcome everyone today. We might kick off the discussion, I think, with David. David, the Innovative Manufacturing CRC, tell us a bit about it and what did it achieve?
Well, thanks, Keith. And as an engineer, we love our acronyms. So the IMCRC was the short term for it. CRCs have been around for about 30 years. And the challenge we took on board in 2016 through an investment made by the Commonwealth Government through our CRC was to get Australia going on the Industry 4 journey. Back in 2016, we were still debating what to call this fourth industrial revolution. And our job was to see if we could stimulate particularly Australian-owned small and medium businesses to invest in new designs, new technology, new practices, but working with the best of the Australian universities and the CSIRO. So really to drive collaborative outcomes to make game-changing technology breakthroughs. And I'm pleased to say across about 70 or more projects, we had a huge amount of success, which tells me that finding the right partnerships, finding the right catalysts, Australian companies can get on the digitalization journey and can find a way to create new products and services, not just for Australia, but to take to the world.
I did read that there was some sort of huge number that represented the ongoing benefit of the work that you've done in the billions of dollars.
Yeah, very pleasingly, and it's not a number that the CRC themselves has created. We've catalysed through the investments we've made, but we've invested $40 million worth of Commonwealth money over that period. That led to over $250 million, roughly, of overall research activity. That's driven about $4 billion of economic benefit to manufacturing industry by 2030. And pleasingly for me, it's catalysed another $2 billion worth of investment in technology, further investment in research and development. And so it just shows that where government agencies, independent organisations like CRCs can get the business model right and can actually think and plan and consider the problems that real world companies have, then I think magic can be created.
Very good. Catherine, you're at the coalface when it comes to one of the industry sectors, so the food sector in particular in South Australia, which is
most important in South Australia, I might add, Keith.
Most important sector. So I was reading on your website, you talk about your organisation being this platform for growth for the sector. Can you take us through that and what are some of the things that you're focused on?
Yeah, absolutely. So firstly, we are the only one of our kind in terms of state-based peak body for food and beverage. So other states sort of look and go, well, where's our equivalent in any other state? And there isn't one. So we've had a really fortunate history of working really closely with government and industry to help our industry grow. So that's the fundamental platform. It's about growth. We have three strategic pillars: growing markets, growing capability and capacity, and growing connections. And the connections is the advocacy piece, really, as amongst other things. So South Australia has a real uniqueness around collaboration as well, because we're a small state. Our industry is typically made up of small to medium-sized enterprises, and often privately owned and family owned. So it's quite different to some of the other states because everybody knows each other in the state. And you know, we've got a great relationship with the state government, we've got a great relationship with our members, and we're there almost as translators in some respects. And one of our really significant roles is to actually see what's over in the horizon. And industry's doing the doing, our industry, and so we need to sort of be helping them with what their real needs are here and now, and a lot of them are around engineering in the capability space, but also what's coming, because if we're not prepared for that, it's going to blindside the whole industry, and the competitive nature of global competition is going to be really challenged. And I think it is anyway at the moment with the fallout of COVID. I think that from an Australian and South Australian perspective, and it goes across all industries, I think is we've lived in a bubble for the last 3 and a bit years, and I think the rest of the world has got on with some of this kind of stuff, and we've got a bit of catching up to do.
Very good. And I can say, even though I'm based in Melbourne, not in South Australia, I'm a big supporter of food and beverage from South Australia. So if you open my fridge, you're going to find Cooper's beer.
Of course.
And if you open the cupboard that my wife thinks I don't know that she has, you'll find lots of Haig's chocolate.
Well, the funny thing about Haig's chocolate too is very South Australian based and owned and operated, but people in Victoria think that Haig's is a Victorian business. So they've done a really, really great job of everyone wanting to own a piece of them.
Yeah, thanks. Milan, you've got a really important role for Siemens in the region. What sort of things do you do? What sort of customers are you working with, and what are you seeing?
So I have a very exciting role in Siemens because I get to work with customers of all sizes, small, medium, and large, who are looking to innovate, who are looking to digitalize their manufacturing facilities or their businesses, and who are looking to decarbonize, really those three key areas. And the beauty is that it's not across single sector. I actually work with food and beverage as my personal application expertise and work very closely with food assay, but also across other sectors like tunnels and infrastructure, water, wastewater, data centers, and so on. And that keeps me busy and excited because I'm always brainstorming new methodologies, new ways to apply our technologies to solve real customer problems in different verticals. So in a nutshell, I have a lot of food and beverage while I'm seeing clients all across the country.
Excellent. David, apart from your role in the IMCRC, which was really Australian-based, you also have quite a lot of global experience. And even we've travelled together as part of the Prime Minister's Industry 4.0 task force to Germany and to Austria last year as well. You've travelled a lot more than me around the world and seen what companies are doing. What have you seen that's really impressed you in which countries?
I think before I answer that, we have to always look at what is a little bit unique or different about Australia. We're separated geographically between our major hubs of industry. We have huge opportunity to grow industry and manufacturing out in regional and rural areas. But our definition of small and medium businesses is much smaller than it is in Germany or the UK. And more than 90% of most of the industry in most of our sectors are Australian family-owned small and medium businesses. And so if you're looking for best practice elsewhere in the world, you've got to look to how you then adapt to bring that back to Australia. What can we learn from it? Ironically, the CRCs, which were founded over 30 years ago, that model has been tried to be copied in other countries without the same success because they're not solving the same type of problem. One thing I have seen, though, overseas work very well is the concept of physical spaces that manufacturers, industrialists, companies can come together with the research sector and academics. And where I've seen this work really well, such as the UK Catapult Centres, Manufacturing USA Institutes, for example, Fraunhofer, often these tap into the best that's available in the universities, but they're actually not inside the university itself. And so you deal with the concern that engineers and scientists and people in industry have about what's going to happen about my ideas and my intellectual property. And where I've seen this work really well is bringing industry and research together, but doing it in an environment where both feel very comfortable working collaboratively. You're not in each other's facilities. And that model is something that we actually haven't really invested in here. We have lots of hubs and precincts, but we haven't got them up to the scale where they are really leading our pathway on something like net zero or sustainability or robotics or artificial intelligence, for example. And we don't have locations where you can latch sector-specific needs onto as well. So that's something I've seen elsewhere in the world that we've talked about doing in Australia, but we've never actually committed to that model.
Maybe there's an opportunity for you there.
Maybe there is. There's an opportunity for the country, to be honest.
Yeah. Bettina, in your other role in the Department of Industry, Innovation and Science, I notice that one of the areas that you're looking at involves business model innovation for the green economy. Can you tell us what that's about?
Yes, so Professor Joran Roos, an international expert, is working with companies in South Australia, including in the food and beverage sector, to help them understand and unlock more opportunities from this transition to net zero. That includes not only reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but it also includes developing new goods and services as a result of the transition. So fully understanding what the opportunities are. An example of where the South Australian government, for example, is looking at these broader opportunities is the hydrogen sector, the emerging hydrogen sector. Critical minerals is another area that's of interest. And then downstream manufacturing, those are some of those areas that are of interest.
Very good. Well, speaking of opportunities, Catherine, in the food and beverage sector in South Australia, what are sort of the opportunities that you're seeing and maybe some of the challenges that you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I think in terms of opportunities, we are very connected industry, and there's a lot of cross collaboration which leads to innovation. And so we've got that well established. I think in South Australia too, we've got such a strong primary sector as well, that the connection between primary industries and the value-added sector is really a big opportunity. And I think one of the things that's been difficult is that value adding upstream from primary production, and I think that's definitely opportunity that we've been talking about for a long time. And I think given our primary sector is so strong and across a whole lot of different sectors as well, we're not a specialist in any one particular sector. There's the opportunity there. Look, obviously with seafood, there's a lot of opportunity with value adding, and I think, working through that as well. And then, of course, grains is a big sector too. So there's lots of opportunities for collaboration. I think in terms of challenges, what we see, and picking up on that SME family-owned concept is really important, because a lot of our sector are on the smaller side, so they don't necessarily know what's going on in the rest of the world, and the adaptability of what's going on in the rest of the world back into South Australia and broader Australia is really critical. And I think sustainability as a terminology is an all-encompassing one, but we've got a few headwinds around that, because just even getting ready for net zero is one thing, but some of the unintended consequences that we're already experiencing has been really interesting. And I can give a good example with that with CO2. All our sector uses CO2 for different things. So there's not one, we use it for this, it's really across the board. Because there's a low supply of CO2 currently, because of some of the unintended consequences in terms of the transition to net zero. And I think we've got to be really agile, that when things that are unanticipated come along, it's stopped production for a couple of our businesses recently. And so we need to, working with DIS in particular, to make sure that any market failure that appears is actually dealt with really quickly. And not everyone's going to pick up what that is until industry picks up the phone and says, I've got a problem. So I think we've got to be really aware of that. Certainly around, there's a lot of targets that our industry has to look at. We've got food waste targets, we've got packaging targets, a container deposit scheme issues are emerging, and all of these are quite legitimate. Our responsibility collectively is to make sure that our industry is well prepared and doesn't fall off the perch, and that is very much a collective responsibility.
obviously for South Australia in particular, very, very important with all of those great industries that you have here within that sector. And like I said, other states also rely on that, and the rest of the world with exports relies on that. Milan, talking about targets and some of the targets Catherine mentioned there, one of them was net zero, which is part of our conversation today. So there's a bit of, confusion between carbon neutral and net zero. Can you help us understand what this means, what it looks like?
Yeah, sure. So I like to usually leverage the Paris Climate Agreement because, in my view, that's where we really, as a globe, started to gain momentum towards net zero and carbon neutrality and so on. And in a nutshell, in terms of carbon neutral, what it really means is that typically an organization will focus on area of their business from a CO2 emissions perspective, and they will try to improve their footprint on the CO2 emissions, and that's what carbon neutrality eventually really leads to. Then looking at the the net zero is not just carbon, it includes other greenhouse emissions like nitrous oxide, as well as other greenhouse gases. And the objective is collectively to get to net zero as for the greenhouse gases. So in addition to going to a net zero position of your greenhouse emissions, it also focuses on the supply chain, not just your own business operations. So fundamentally, that's the difference between carbon neutral and net zero. And the Paris Climate Agreement suggests that we need to get to the net zero position by 2050, and as you already mentioned earlier, to that 43 to 45% reduction by 2030.
And Keith, I might just add to that because if you're a young engineer, all right, what does that mean? Because it's in a time horizon that small businesses aren't actually really planning for at the moment. It's almost a government target that is so out there. I like to think when I approach problems, and it comes through I think schooling in lean manufacturing back in the automotive production days, which Industry 4.0 only allows you to turbocharge even more. I like to think of the concept of a zero waste future, of which zero emissions, harmful products, harmful gases is part of that. But what digitalization allows you to do is do things like very, very smart designs where you're not producing waste of any form in your manufacturing or in your processing and your supply chains. It allows you to gather data so you can forecast where you're not having downtime on equipment, you're not leaving lights on, you're not using those energy or even raw materials. And so I'd encourage engineers to think about, when you think about net zero, to think about zero waste production, zero waste supply chains, and the energy solution will actually come as part of that. The risk is if we get very focused on energy, then we won't be solving some of the other challenges we've got about rising labor costs, access to skills, supply chain disruptions. That's the opportunity for engineering, and it's really at the heart of where I think engineers can change the future for Australia.
So once you get to that point that you explained, Milan, of your emissions in your supply chain, that's a game changer because it's now interconnected. So I can't achieve my goals unless you're achieving yours. So now we're all part of a connected sort of future. And that's what the Scope 3 emissions that are wrapped up in net zero targets, that's what that means. And so talking about supply chains, Bettina, you're doing a lot of work on supply chains, and one of them is the hydrogen supply chain. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, thanks, Keith. So I'll maybe just explain Industry Capability Network as well. So I am the National Chair of the Industry Capability Network, which has offices across Australia and was established in the mid-1980s to connect local suppliers to major projects across a range of sectors. Core sectors include mining, energy, defence, construction infrastructure, a bit in health as well. And one of the sectors that's particularly of interest now is hydrogen. And so the team in South Australia is mapping hydrogen supply chains so that we can benefit not only from attracting these projects to South Australia, of which the Hydrogen Jobs Plan is one. That's a 250 megawatt electrolyser that is planned to be operational by December 2025, which is supported by the South Australian government. but also the hydrogen hubs that are planned in the Arthur and the Mayala region, and a range of other hydrogen projects. We want those projects to get off the ground, have local suppliers involved, and then also build the local supply chains for all the projects that are in the pipeline. And there's certain capabilities we don't have in Australia yet. We need to build those capabilities. We need to help companies invest, make investment decisions, understand what the pipeline of opportunities is as well.
Yeah, I mean, hydrogen it's such an important topic in that energy transition as well. It's going to have an impact on a lot of us, and South Australia is in a fantastic position with the abundance of renewable energy access.
And so imagine, so the confluence of wind and solar puts us in a unique position, and we already have days where we have 100% renewables in our power grid. Imagine not only exporting hydrogen as a fuel elsewhere, but imagine exporting the final products that are manufactured using that hydrogen. They have low embedded carbon or zero embedded carbon, and what that can do for industry in Australia.
That's a nice segue into the next topic. Late last year, the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre in Canberra announced that Australia's economic complexity ranking went down again, and I think we're ranked at 91 in the world. I attended the Industry Climate Conference in Adelaide in April, and Deputy Premier Susan Close, in her opening speech on the second day, talked about the future of industry and said the future of industry is to have, if you're going to have successful industry, you want highly complex industry and you want low carbon industry, those two things combined. So can you take us through what's actually happening? So Bettina and David, you probably got the finger on the pulse on this. What's happening? What does this complexity mean? Why do we care? And what does it mean to be low carbon in industry?
Well, low carbon, that one's probably obvious, because if we are high carbon and the rest of the world is moving to targets and Australia's moving to targets, then we are locked out of markets. Yeah.
And Keith, I think, if there's one capability I'd love to see capacity built in Australia very quickly, it's the capacity to design and engineer. And I know we're probably preaching to the converted on this webinar, but when I think of those companies that did very well out of COVID, at the heart of what they were able to do was to very quickly change their strategies, redesign what they were offering to the world, offer services as well as physical products and processes. And to me, that's what we don't have enough capacity or capability of here in Australia. If you can design it, you can build it, because we can apply the Industry 4 technologies to make it competitive to build here, but we've got to have the capability to design and engineer. And at the moment, we import a lot of complex products. We don't export a lot of complex products. And if we want to change that, I think we need an injection in our capacity and capability to design and engineer.
So I didn't like what I read in the press release, which talked about us being ranked 91, which is the lowest OECD country in the world, and we sit between Namibia and Kenya. That's right, and the direction wasn't looking good for the future on that either.
We'll put it in perspective. This is the Harvard Economic Atlas of Complexity, it's called. So go and Google it, have a look. It makes fascinating reading. And you can also map the types of products that Australia and other countries that are comparable to us export. So it's a measure of what we export. When we're 91st, that's 91st only of 133, so it's not 200 plus nations around the world, which puts us in the bottom third. Now, we sit ninth for the gross domestic product per capita. So we're in the top 10 in the world of nations that are creating value, but it's not going to be the kind of value that keeps us going forward. So when you look at the projections for 2030, get this, Australia's growth between now and 2030 puts it in the bottom 10 to 15%, all right, globally, compared to those other 133 nations that are growing economically. And this is where the opportunity comes, that if we continue doing the same thing, that's where we'll end up. The whole renewables, the low carbon economy, the low waste economy, and the adoption of rapid digitalization across our industries is our pathway, not just to productivity, but it's our pathway to job creation and real sustainable business models. but the design engineering will get us complex products that we can ship overseas, as opposed to simple products like our ores, our minerals, our wool. And there's nothing wrong with those because they've enabled a great society and economy in Australia, but times are rapidly changing and there's an opportunity for us to seize.
So the key to that is value adding, isn't it?
The key to that is value adding. And it comes down to the ability to design and engineer not just products, but processes, services, platforms that you can take to the world as competitive. And the world is looking at Australia as an opportunity for new energy solutions, low carbon future. And so the two are coming together. It's a great opportunity for us if we can seize it.
So if anyone can make it, so if it's so simple that anyone can make it, then you're only competing on things like labour and logistics like shipping and things like that. And our labour costs are high. We're a long way from any.
Correct. But we have a
They're also
comparative
high.
advantage around renewables that we can now leverage.
Yes. And food quality.
Yeah, absolutely. Although we can't rest on our laurels. We do have excellent food quality, but there's lots of other countries around the world that do as well. So I think we need to make sure that we're outward looking and make sure, some of the comments made too, market access is going to become a bigger and bigger issue. And I think we're working on a project at the moment around sustainability credentials. We've done a 5-year export strategy for the food and beverage sector. And we're doing a global scan of what the credentials are so that we are getting our industry ready to be able to deal with that. So, it's really important because it's not top of mind at the moment for industry, and that's where we've got a role to play.
You guys have a big role to play. Yeah. And speaking of that, Milan and Catherine, you were heavily involved in something that was announced earlier this year in South Australia. So the pilot of Sea Green. Do you want to take us through, and that was announced with the Deputy Premier and with yourself, Catherine, as well, and with the CEO of Siemens in the country. So it's a significant project and it's a very important pilot. So the first time this has happened in the country. So take us through what we're piloting and why this is important and why you're involved as well, Catherine.
Well, I think first of all, it's a recognition that the food and beverage sector here is so critical. And I think there's two elements to it. It's the awareness piece to actually start to learn and understand from an industry perspective what the markets are requiring. And then it's over to sort of Milan and the team in terms of really showcasing what this, there's going to be one business that goes through this process, and Milan can talk a little bit more about that, but it's really then important to really shout from the rooftops about best practice, and I think it's fantastic that it's in South Australia and our sector, that we're able to probably showcase globally some of the work that will be done. But Milan, you can talk more about the detail.
Yeah, sure. So I guess we are talking about eventually getting to that net zero position. And the complexities that exist in the supply chain, we need to now start to tackle those, right? And the Sea Green platform, what it allows companies to do is create a transparent, accurate, complete, and credible data sharing platform, which means if you are a manufacturer, you have 10 suppliers, you're able to get the data for their emissions in a safe and secure and confidential manner, more importantly, in a methodology and standards that are globally recognized, and take the risk out of your company's, mandate in that sense that, you are following global standards. So the Sea Green platform then allows you to share that data across the supply chain and therefore get eventually to the product carbon footprint, because product level carbon footprint is what's necessary to get to the net zero position, because once you've captured what's your carbon footprint for producing a chocolate or a soft drink, then you can make decisions to improve your carbon footprint. Going back to your point, come up with materials, whether it's raw materials or a final product design that is more efficient, perhaps lightweight, or uses alternative methods that you can overall reduce your carbon emissions. So the pilot we're doing it in a way that it's manageable. So we are going to focus on one organization with one product line, and that is time bound so that we can actually get a positive impact for the organization who we were doing the pilot with. But then, as Catherine said, that serves as a local reference case that the wider industry can trust and learn from, so that we can start to roll out this program at Sea Green platform and decarbonisation of supply chains across the nation.
And I think we talked about economic complexity before, but it is a very complex. If you're a small food and beverage manufacturer and you talk about soft drinks or chocolate, there are so many inputs, and I think it's so overwhelming. People don't know where to start, and I think it's really critical. And simplifying it to one product in one business and getting that right, so people then understand the principles behind it, is going to be absolutely critical for our industry.
I think, Keith, one of the other opportunities, and I've seen actually positive growth in this area over the last few years, is the ability to design and engineer the processing equipment, so the plants and the equipment that we manufacture things from. I was a bit frustrated in my life as a CRC that we couldn't find a lot of food and beverage companies to help in the Industry 4 investment space. And part of that is because the Industry 4 investment and design is actually done in places like Italy, where the equipment's designed and made, and then we buy the equipment. So investing in Industry 4 is not something the sector's embraced very quickly. What we are seeing now is the ability to design and engineer manufacturing equipment that is highly complex, and that's exportable in itself. And that's, again, an example where we can build those services, and it applies to the net zero area, the renewable sector, as much as it does to food and beverage and other sectors. And that's an area, again, that I think is a growth opportunity for Australia, because we've got incredibly smart people. And this is an export opportunity for us.
I think that's definitely the case. I mean, I often hear about the challenges of importing equipment, whether it be from Italy or Spain or anywhere else. And of course, then those engineers need to come to Australia to commission the piece of equipment. And none of this is cheap. And I think building capability within South Australia and Australia around that, the actual machinery is really critical. And as you say, if you can flip it around and start exporting that expertise, that is a quantum shift.
Yep, and that's where complexity and jobs. And you build that resilience, that if you can build processing equipment, you can adapt that know-how very quickly, but it applies heavy investment in digitalisation and engineering and so on to be able to do that.
So we need to rapidly deploy digitalisation to industry in the same way that we need to rapidly deploy renewable energy.
But I think in an understandable way. I think recognising, certainly in our sector, that is an overwhelming concept, and the how is absolutely critical, and it actually really needs to connect from a language point of view, an industry language and a manufacturing or engineering language, because we can talk about this conceptually until any time, but the reality is the how, and the understandable how is critical.
And taking that first step is which is what you guys are doing as well.
But I think part of the challenge, and again, the role that both business owners and leaders, but also the engineering community can play, is also being very clear on the why. There's a business case behind this. You need to be clear on what problem you're trying to solve and over what time frame. Arguably, you can jump into the how and the what, but if you're not clear on why you're doing it, and the role I see of engineers in this brave new world is to help inform the why and not leave it to the business owners, all right? Because the engineers actually know what is possible.
And when you're working out the business case, the costs are coming down all the time. It's much easier to connect Internet of Things and to digitise.
Correct.
That sort of leads me to the next topic, actually. In May this year, so that the Australian Industry Group each month produces a report that talks about the manufacturing performance in the country. And in May this year, it was 12 consecutive months of contraction of manufacturing in Australia, which is a scary sort of thought when we're talking about this topic and how important it is right now. There was a few things in that report that I want to highlight and get the opinions of the group from. So one point was they cited labour shortages as part of that. Another was supply chain disruptions. Another one was inflationary pressures. And in fact, the food and beverage sector was amongst the subsectors that experienced steep falls in that. So what role could digitalisation, so now getting to the why factor, what sort of role could it play in turning this situation around? And do we have any examples of where digitalisation has helped businesses turn this situation around? Because it's not every business that goes through this. So open to everyone.
I guess the question on that is very relevant. And actually, what I'm going to give an example links into both what you've just said around digitalization, innovation. So there's a machine builder in Victoria called Automation Innovation, and they're an SME, and they've worked using the recent technology such as artificial intelligence, robotics and automation, and they've come up with a solution to this big problem in the glass industry where the glass bottles, so there's about 700 billion glass bottles that are used and formed every year using the molding machine, the glass molding machine. And the process has not changed for 100 years. So what they have done is using the latest and the greatest, and the engineers who now understand why they needed to do what they needed to do because there's a business case, they've come up with a solution where they have been able to eliminate the use of chemicals in cleaning process completely, which means that is a great sustainability output for the business. And also they've been able to reduce the overall energy cost by about 30% and usage about 30%, sorry. And the biggest, if you look at SME from Australia on a global scale who's come up with a solution that can solve 700 billion bottles, because by improving this process, they're actually going to be using less glass overall every time they manufacture a new glass bottle. So the impact, the multiples of it, is quite considerable, and all of a sudden, as an industry, they can reap the benefit because someone has done the R&D and they've used the latest and greatest to their advantage. So this is, I guess, an example of where Australia, we focused on high intelligence, high value output rather than focusing on some of the weaker points, which is around labor costs. So we have to use our strengths as our advantages.
I see, when we talk about sustainability, your mind goes down the environmental path, what's good for the planet. There's a growing sense in very mature economies from an industrial perspective like Germany that sustainability is equally about the sustainability of good work, good, meaningful, high-skilled jobs, well-paid jobs. In what I've seen over the last few years of companies that have invested and embraced Industry 4.0, it has led to job creation. All right, so they've put robotics in, they've put automated warehouses, Amazon style, they've invested in 3D printing, they've invested in virtual reality, augmented reality in the design phase. In every case that I've seen, it's created jobs, but it has also raised the skill level of those inside the organization. So you have a 50-year-old welder, right, now embracing HoloLens technology. They're not rolling drawings out on the floor and gauging off the drawings. They're actually building things in real-world situation much more accurately, much quicker, to the point that we can be competitive in Australia, even compared to markets like China. And this is how companies are onshoring a lot of products and a lot of complexity that was being done overseas, but it's creating jobs in the process. It's a bold move for these companies to make. It's an investment that has some risk attached to it. The smart ones collaborate with others and share some of these ideas and technologies. I'm not sure anyone competes on how their warehouse actually operates. So why wouldn't companies cluster in a supply chain and share know-how around warehouse management systems, for example, or energy measurement or distribution? But if you're not digitalized, you don't have the data. And even if you get the data, what do you then do with it? And that's the beauty of getting into this whole space of digitalization, is that you have data on which you can make decisions and share and collaborate with others to come up with much better solutions.
And data is only the starting point, because what do you do with the data? An example is predictive maintenance, where you might be measuring the vibrations on a particular piece of machinery, and then when the vibrations increase, you do, it's time to do maintenance so you don't shut down your whole production line. Also, that increase in vibration may be because it's using more energy, so that you can reduce your greenhouse gas emissions as well. It's all connected.
Yes.
Yeah.
Catherine, are there any, do you see a difference in your customer base where some are more digitalised than others, and what's that?
I think definitely, and picking up on David's point, what I am seeing is those higher paid, higher skilled jobs are appearing, and because of that, and I think labour shortages is actually going to be an impetus too, that to upgrade what you're doing in automation. At the end of the day, we produce food and beverages here, but we do have to, and we can attract a premium, but not a massive premium. So automation is really critical to keep some of the costs down, and getting skilled people who have the smarts around automation and what's going to work for the business is definitely the case. There is a lot more automation coming into the industry, and of course it's those larger businesses that are taking it quicker than some of the smaller ones. But, you know, as a community here, everybody is pretty connected, so there's always someone ringing someone to say, have you got, or how do you solve, or some things like that. So there's actually, it's sort of that whole rising all boats type of scenario I think we're seeing and will continue to see.
And one of the ways that our department is working with industry is sharing emerging technologies. So we've established an emerging technologies interest group, and the first session was in the last month around artificial intelligence. So just sharing that knowledge, and so people can learn from each other as well, and also from experts.
We have a number of South Australian customers as well, customers all over the country, but pleasingly, I guess we've seen digitalisation and automation playing a role in big companies, in, say, take the food and beverage sector, but also in small companies. Cooper's Brewery is one of our big customers in South Australia, and I remember speaking to Tim Cooper late last year about their journey and what it meant. And he said that in the last 30 years, we've been able to move from mechanisation to automation and digitalisation, and at the same time, we have an 800% productivity gain in that time. So it's about being competitive. But Milan, we've got examples of small companies in the food and beverage sector in Victoria, for instance, also embracing digitalisation. Take us through one of those.
Yeah, there's a company called Wolf of the Willows, for example, in Victoria, who are really a microbrewery. And during COVID, like many businesses, they had to pivot because, you know, majority of the customers could be at the pubs and the clubs where, you know, there's not as many sales coming anymore because everyone's in lockdown. However, in contrast, the sales consumption of beverages at retail level increased. So they had to pivot and leverage the digitalization technology. So, you know, they worked with Siemens and the Siemens partners, and the end result was that they were able to reduce their overall fermentation process time from 25 days down to 18 days, which meant that they've got a capacity gain of around 30%, and therefore they were able to get more product out in the market in a shorter time frame to capture that growth trend, which was consumer direct through the retail channel. And being a small company, they would have had to think the cost of implementation and the complexity of implementation. And the step that they took, which I always recommend to every organization, end user or not, is to collaborate, because you do not know everything. There is a value that a vendor adds, there is a value a consultant adds, there's value system integration companies add, and the manufacturer adds, and you have them all in the same room, brainstorm the problem, the solution outcome, it will have a great ROI. Because traditionally, for food and beverage industry in Australia, we are quite conventional in our approach. Manufacturer processes, there is a lot of disconnect still within the systems that are on the production floor, for example. So the opportunity gain is quite large. So this is a great example where a small business has leveraged digitalization and they have reaped the reward. So it's no longer just for the large organizations.
And so there's a topic we touched on earlier, which I think is a really positive one that comes out of digitalisation, and it's the more digitalised industry is in Australia, regardless of what the industry is, the more able they are to innovate. And I think that Australians are very good at solving problems if they've got the right tools and the right skills to do it. When we innovate, can we compete with the world? I mean, you've been to Hanover Fair several times, and this is the benchmark of the best, and same with you, Milan. I'm not sure if anyone else has. It's the world's largest technology trade event. Prime ministers, presidents attend it. It's a big deal. Can Australia play on that stage when it comes to digitalisation and innovation?
Yes, and I've seen enough examples to prove it. But it's actually not about the technology. It's about more the behaviours that go with it. So the ambition, the collaboration, the willingness to take risks. It's about having the right appetite and understanding your market and the problem you're really trying to solve, and whether you can build services enabled by what you make. So there are some real behavioral attributes and capabilities. When you bring people of like-minded ambition together, magic happens. And there are lots of companies that are taking on the world's very best. They are few and far between. We'd like to see them much more homogenous across our sector, that we've got lots and lots of examples of companies that are taking amazing things to the world. But we have enough to learn from and enough to build from.
So, a lot of the talk around climate change tends to be about doom and gloom. And what I'm hearing here is actually about opportunity, and I guess the role of engineers in that opportunity. There seems to be a new language that comes out of this. We're talking about digital twins and IoT and robotics and artificial intelligence. And then on the climate side, we're talking about net zero versus carbon neutral, scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. What advice would you give to engineers who need to sort of get on this journey? What's the advice that this group would give to those people? So this is my closing question for the session.
I would suggest that engineers probably need their own mindset. Engineering has not been in Australia the highest respected sort of career or vocation you can go into. And I'm not saying it is the highest, but what engineers need to do is to assume a leadership role in the businesses they operate, make themselves part of the discussion about why and how and what, and not simply be delivering on engineering solutions. I think the other thing is, to do that successfully, you've got to continually learn and find out what is happening with the latest technologies, but put yourself into those arguments, discussions as part of the leadership level of the businesses you work for, and make your views on the table. And engineering will have a huge impact.
I agree totally with those 2 points, and I would probably come from a slightly different angle and say soft skills are really critical as well. So you can be the smartest, you can have all the answers, but if you can't actually communicate it and participate in those discussions effectively, you'll be dismissed from that. So the soft skills, emotional intelligence, which traditionally doesn't sit in an engineer's mindset, I think is really, really critical to make things happen, because you can collaborate all you like, but if you're actually all in your own lane and you don't actually read people and understand what's going on, you're not going to be nearly as successful. So, I've probably come from a different background. I'm not an engineer, but I think the soft skills are really critical.
Yeah, I'm the engineer.
Yeah, I'm an engineer, and I sit in the business seat. So my, I guess, conclusion from dealing with the manufacturing industry in particular is that engineers are given a task, which is usually go and implement this, or go and design this, or go and try to do something to increase our production. And then they do that, and the projects still don't go ahead sometimes, a lot of the times, especially in the last 2-3 years as the cost of capital continues to increase. Then they need to think differently. And this is where the amalgamation between digitalization and decarbonization comes into play. So the engineers now need to sit back and say, if I execute this project, we're going to gain 1% production gain, the ROI is XYZ, because that's what the financial team will look at. But if I also put a decarbonization angle to this, by doing this, are we reducing our energy cost by 20%? Now you have a different story to present. And I think this is very important, that the engineering teams need to have this multifaceted approach. It's no longer just an engineering approach to going and executing a project. That's my conclusion from my experience, and that's what I preach to everyone who I speak to, that put the two together, because the fundamental technology that gets executed is the same. It's how you look at it, the same data that's being generated. How do you purpose it or repurpose it to get the best outcome for the business?
So that's a wrap for today, and I think that's a good way to close. I hope this was a really thought-provoking discussion for everyone. I found it fascinating, and thank you very much to our panelists for providing your inputs here. And thank you very much to Engineers Australia again. Thank you.